our annual budget workshop to order with roll call.
Kostler. Here. McAlpine.
Here.
Kraus. Here. Cavelli.
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Betts.
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm missing Barb there. This must be the same as this.
We'll now move to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. I'm not aware of anybody signing in. Does anybody care to address the village board at this time? Thank you. We'll go ahead and start the budget workshop. Jake?
Mayor, Village Board, this is our second budget meeting in a series of two. As you know, we had a discussion on February 20th. That was a review of our CIP. Today, what we're going to be doing here and focusing on is looking at more of the all funds picture. We're not going to be looking over 5 years at all. We're going to focus on this next fiscal year. The general fund is the area that we're going to concentrate on the most. We're also going to cover additional funds such as water and sand, but then regroup and go back on some of these capital projects that we discussed on February 20th. Here's a summary of all the funds that are in the Village of Cary. There's 12 funds here on that top row. You'll see, and as I mentioned, the majority of our discussion today is going to focus on the general fund. We covered a lot of these other funds, MFT, capital projects, vehicle and equipment, the TIP funds, land conservancy, water and sand, parking and building at our February 20th meeting. Our preliminary results here for this current fiscal year, the fiscal year that we're in right now, and ending on April 30, 2018, is we're expecting to end to the good here of about 20 to 30,000. So that is good news. Department heads have done a great job in controlling expenditures throughout the fiscal year. We still have a couple months left in the fiscal year, so obviously that number could change a little bit. We won't know the final number, obviously, until we complete our CAFR. Going forward, then, too, for our unassigned fund balance, we have healthy reserves, so we're expecting to end this current fiscal year at approximately 50% fund balance, which is very good for a municipality of Cary's size. Our fund balance policy is, excuse me, as many of the village board is aware, is a 45% fund balance. Being slightly above that 45%, typically I'd look to move those dollars over to a fund such as a capital projects fund or the building fund. I do think next fiscal year is going to be challenging for us. I'd recommend at this time for the general fund that we keep those dollars in the general fund in case we need to utilize those to balance the budget next year. Our bond rating, we got that here this week, and that was sent out to the village board on Friday, the report from Moody's. Not sure if everyone has had a chance to look at it, but it's a good report. It's a solid report. The village is ranked as AA2, which is great for a municipality of Cary's size. It's somewhat unrealistic for the village to get to a AAA rating. Mike, can you give the village board a little bit of an overview here of some of the challenges that the village faces to attain that AAA rating and why that may be unrealistic for us?
Sure. The Village of Cary at a AA2 has a very solid credit rating. To make that jump, let's say, to AAA, it would take quite a bit on the village's part to attempt to get there. First off, the Village of Cary is a non-home rule community, which means that we are limited by tax caps. So we don't have unlimited taxing authority. Generally, you'd see in AAA communities where, number one, they have unlimited taxing ability. They tend to go to the bond market often, tend to have their results reviewed on a regular basis. Generally, the only time Moody's or S&P takes a look at us is during our annual review, or if by chance we have a project that we need to get rated to have bonds issued. But we are in a very healthy position. I mean, they look favorably upon the Village of Cary and our financial backing, so I think we're in a good place.
Are there any questions for Mike on that?
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, very good. So we should be proud of that rating, the AA2 here for the Village of Cary. Our debt, just a little overview of the outstanding debt within the Village of Cary. Our BAT bonds that we've talked about here several times and covered it a little bit, I believe, during the CIP discussion on the 20th of February. This debt issuance here, the village is looking at paying that off early. It would be November of 2019 when we'd have that paid off. That debt issuance was issued, I believe, in 2009. $5 million debt issuance that when it was an influx of cash to go to our road program. So we will be paying that off early in 2019, and that's an opportunity to use that revenue source, the electric utility tax, to roll over and ultimately pay for our new building here, or cover the cost for that future debt issuance that we're expecting to issue. The second one in the middle there, the IEPA loan for water and sanitation, I believe that this was for when we had our last wastewater treatment plant expansion. That debt issuance was plus or minus about $10 million, so it's pretty significant here. We're going forward and obviously paying that off here. That's included in the water and sewer rate study that we did. And then finally, the phosphorus limit project that I believe the village board is well aware of, that is currently ongoing right now. We expect to finish that project here this fall. So we don't have the schedule yet for repayment on that, but all of that infrastructure, again, that was a multi-million-dollar project and a requirement that the village had to complete, but that is baked into the water and sewer rate studies. We certainly have healthy reserves and funding able to cover that debt issuance. Is there any questions about the debt issuance? Okay, going forward, the strategic objectives that we have for next fiscal year, these are some of the items that we're planning to work on over the next year. For budgeting, obviously that's an important priority for the Village of Cary. We want to pass a balanced budget that the village board is going to be reviewing today. Approve our 5-year CIP through resolution by the village board. Our CIP is going to be updated annually. We're going to continue to look at it every year to provide you with that vision for future projects within the Village of Cary. Exercise budget discipline throughout the fiscal year. Village board does a great job of doing that. I think last year we had maybe one expense that was, or this current fiscal year, we had one expense that was maybe outside of the budget, and that was our engineering study, our flood study that we did that was recommended by staff, and the village board had approved that. And then finally, explore additional funding sources for both the general fund and CIP. I think that's important that sometime this year, we're going to have to talk seriously about some new funding sources, and sometimes that may be new taxes. Those aren't fun conversations to have, but we've got to look at this holistically here, and not just in one fiscal year, but looking out how we're going to cover some of these costs going forward. Economic development is obviously an important priority for any municipality within the Chicagoland area. We continue to work on the Unified Development Ordinance. This has been a very significant project here. It's a multi-year project that we're looking to encourage quality development, improve efficiencies, help modernize our village ordinances. We're in the process too right now of working with CMAP and the Village of Algonquin. We've partnered with. We were able to, Director Simmons we were awarded a grant, and he is now working with those parties to allow us to explore Route 31, that corridor, both in the Village of Cary's corporate limits, but continuing on into Algonquin. So CMAP is going to help us look at potential land use options within that corridor. That corridor is very important to the Village of Cary, as everyone can understand, just from the commercial perspective. We don't have a lot of commercial opportunities here within the Village of Cary, and it's going to be important for how we plan and develop that corridor in the future. Again, related to economic development, we're going to be working on inventory and evaluating underutilized land that's both in Cary and just directly outside of Cary for how we can continue to add to our commercial tax base. And then finally, we want to work to have our ED task force members included with our business visits. Infrastructure, we've got a lot of infrastructure projects here, as you saw through our CIP meeting. One of the most important here, though, is to get an architect online to help us plan for future public safety and Village Hall facility. We need to have a discussion sometime at this year. We didn't get to it last year, but discuss the future of the senior center building. Right now, the village doesn't utilize that building for any use. It is utilized currently by the Park District for their senior operations. Want to continue to invest in our CIP, our capital improvement projects, as outlined by the village board. Construction on the Metro building is another significant project that we're going to be completing or starting this year. It's been a lot of work that's been put into by staff, Pacific and IDOT. We expect for construction
this fall. We will have an
can be brought forward to the village board with Metra to continue to move that process forward here. And then finally, again, we touched on a little bit our wastewater treatment plant upgrade
that we were required to meet as far as phosphorus limit goes.
That project is ongoing. Significant capital investment that our Public Works Department is working on right now. Construction is expected to be completed here in October. We need to continue, with our limited resources here to work with our government partners here to find ways to cost share and improve our efficiencies. It's not only working with local government agencies, but public-private partnerships. Whenever there's an opportunity for us to save dollars in working with public or
partnerships, we have to take advantage of that.
on the very significant project for village. It's very important to our downtown. It's been vacant for almost 8 years. Excuse me, almost 8 years now. We need to work with districts, hopefully come up with a vision. And then finally, Meyer Material Lafarge site that's going to be coming online this June. The village is going to be taking over that property. I think at some point in this coming fiscal year, there needs to be a conversation. Myself, Director Simmons, go over and talk to the Park District representatives, Conservation District representatives about their interest in that property. As has been mentioned many times, I don't think that we're in the business of running parks. I think that is better utilized by being run either by the Park District or the Conservation District.
Thoughtful housing growth, obviously adding new residents here provides a benefit to the village of Cary from a property tax, income tax standpoint, MFT, motor fuel tax contributions that the village gets. But we want to focus on high quality developments here. Also continue to evaluate needs for senior housing growth within the village of Cary.
What do you mean by focus on high quality housing developments, like specific?
Well, what I say is, and why that's in there is it's just not any development. When I say housing growth, we're just not going to approve any development that comes before us. We have certain standards that we want our developments to look like and how we want them to interact with their surroundings. So as we put together this budget, and we're going to get to here in a couple minutes to talk about our budget for next year related to the general fund, we've got some challenges that we've encountered this year and we're probably going to continue to encounter into the future. I've got 3 that I've outlined here. One of those that I think most folks are well aware of is just the challenges that the state is currently dealing with. The state continues, though, to divert revenues away from local governments. It's not only the village of Cary, it's municipalities all over the state of Illinois. And this is impacting how we do business here. For next fiscal year, the governor's proposal for the budget is to reduce our LGDF, our local government distributed fund, or the income tax that the village of Cary receives by 10%. You can see in that middle column in fiscal year 18-19, it's $145,000, which is significant to the village of Cary. Those are dollars that go into our general fund or our operating fund that go to pay for police, they go to pay for public works employees. And so we've had to make some tough decisions. You can understand and appreciate that if you plug another $145,000 into our budget, it puts us in a better position. It's just common dollars and cents. So that's unfortunate. We hope that the state decides to discontinue the diversion of revenues away from municipalities. I really am not sure where it's going to go into the future, and that's something that we have to keep our eye on. Number two is expenditures related in the general fund here continue to exceed revenue growth. Again, this is another just straight math formula here, is that it presents a challenging situation for us to deal with. When we look at the big three, as we call it, our income tax, sales tax, and property tax, they continue to remain flat. Those are the majority of sources where the village gets revenue to pay for our general fund. Personnel, wages, and benefits. We have contractual obligations.
Unions, costs continue to increase. Our police pension fund, we've seen year over year, is increasing. And so those two don't jive when you have revenues that are going in the opposite direction of your expenditures. And then finally, the third one, and we touched on this at our CIP meeting, is we have an underfunded capital improvement program that is going to need work. We're going to have to work together to solve this problem. The capital projects fund, if you look over on the column on the far left, go down one to capital projects. Vehicle and equipment and MFT. Those are the three funds that I think we have to focus on the most.
The other funds here are in pretty good position from a financial perspective, but capital projects fund, there's a significant cash flow issue. Vehicle and equipment fund, a lot of the revenues that were going into that were Meyer material related. That money is dried up, as we know, and we don't have a funding source for our vehicles going forward. MFT, so those are motor fuel tax dollars that we get on a per capita basis. Those go to pay for roads. Right now, at $500,000 a year, that is not enough dollars to continue to maintain the roads at the level that we expect and our residents expect. So those three funds, we don't have to solve it right now, but we're going to have to spend some time this coming year and going forward on an ongoing basis to solve. So when we get to it, now we're getting into the general fund. This is for next fiscal year, so 18-19, starting May 1, 2018, and finishing in April 30 of 19. Give you a sense, we've got the last 5 years of just how we've trended from a revenue perspective. So good news is that this is a balanced budget. I think the village board should be very proud of that. The challenge here when we look down, though, is within our revenues, is that we have a minor decrease even with our revenues, which has made this effective. Here, touched on it one of the earlier slides, our big three.
For a second,
Yep.
back to the vehicle and equipment fund, projected funding for 5 years. Is that the current balance of the fund right now? That one?
The projected funding, the 1.
There is no source. That's one.
Yep, those are the available dollars. So thanks for that question.
Yep.
And please, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. Revenues, so again, this is a kind of paints the pictures of where our revenues are come from, and we have those three majority revenues.
Sales tax, property taxes. Property tax, pretty straightforward. Sales tax, again, straightforward. Cost for buying goods here in the village of Cary. Income tax is on a per capita basis. This is a portion here where we're seeing the state away from the village of Cary become very significant. Look at it from the overall budget picture. Our revenue trend
Faring over the last few years, as I had mentioned earlier, the property tax has been flat. Income taxes, you can see it's starting to dip due to the state's unfortunate decision. Sales tax also has been pretty flat. Going forward in the expenditures department, expenditures at about $8.1 million. You can see year over year the expenditures, the slight growth that we've had in expenditures. This is very significant here, though, that we've been able to control expenditures to a level of only an increase of 0.2%. So I commend our department heads and all of our village staff to try to control expenditures across the board in their departments. How are the expenditures made up? So the majority of it that you're going to see here is in our police department, and the other piece of the pie is in public works. It's not a surprise. That's where our personnel is, and that's where the costs are. This isn't unique to the village of Cary. This is consistent with almost any municipality that you're going to look at, that your costs are going to be in your police department and public works, because that's where the personnel are going to be. And you can see with this slide here, just those costs for personnel. It's about 75% for our general fund costs are with personnel. Again, that is not unique to the village of Cary. It's pretty straightforward here. We're in the business of providing service to our residents and our customers, and we need personnel to do that. We need contractors to do that. We need our service vendor firms to do that. Without that personnel, we would not be able to provide the level of service that we do to our residents. What have we been doing about it, though? When you look at those costs related to personnel, they are pretty significant within the general fund. But the village of Cary hasn't been sitting on our hands here. We continue to challenge the status quo of how we deliver services to our residents. We've gone from, over the last 10 years, this is a 35% plus or minus reduction in full-time staff without adding back full-time or part-time staff. This is unprecedented. I don't know if there's a lot of communities out there that can say that they've reduced staff by over 35% within the last 10 years without impacting village services. We need to continue to challenge the status quo of how we provide services to our residents. Just within, even in 2017, we've changed how we do business in certain departments here with staffing adjustments that we've made. We've saved almost $300,000. And a lot of this, the majority of this is coming out of the general fund. Without the village board making some of these decisions here, we'd be sitting in a much different situation here as far as cuts that we need to make to the general fund. To the various departments here in review for the next
Here, the cost.
individual department. So I've somewhat categorized here Village Hall, lumped several departments into this, admin, legal, central services, boards and commissions, community development and finance. Even, with all those departments, there's 6 full-time staff. This is essentially who's all sitting here at Village Hall. We have 1 part-time staff, an intern, and also the contractual partners that help us provide our services. So moving over to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that there's been a reduction of approximately 12% of the costs within the Village Hall general fund. The majority of those are assistant position that continues to remain vacant, which is a significant amount of the dollars. We've done some miscellaneous reductions here in standpoint. Community event grant program has been eliminated. We've reduced village prosecuting expenses here next year. Continue to make several small line item adjustments too to get us to that 12% reduction. So going forward in the police department, our police department, which includes patrol investigations, records, and support services, there's 26 sworn and there's 3 civilian staff. We obviously have some contractual arrangements here that have worked well for the village of Cary, especially CCOM, which is a great arrangement for the village. The chief has done a great job. You can look over just how the police budget has trended over the last few years. For this fiscal year, there's only a 2% increase, which is great. Our contractual obligations with our union and our police pension fund contribution, I mean, that makes it up right there. And that might even be a little bit more than that 2%. So the chief has done a great job in controlling the expenses within the department. Our police pension fund contribution, here we've talked about this when we had our actuary in for the pension fund, kind of give an overview of where that is. But obviously that is trending up as we continue to go year over year. Starcom, we had a line item reduction within the Starcom account here. It's a good story when we had transitioned over to Starcom, and just want to have the chief kind of give a little bit of a brief commercial about Starcom for those that are not familiar with it.
Just a couple things, and there's a significant reduction in regards to some of the costs attributed with our communications. And I don't want you to get used to that, because when we purchased our Starcom radios, we received 2 years of free airtime with Starcom, and that is $34 a police portable unit, and then it's $18 a month for a mobile unit that might be mounted in a police, in a vehicle, or a unit that is stationary at the police station. So how we come to this is appointed Chief Macko obtained some funding so
conduct an active shooter exercise at Oak Knoll. We did it in conjunction with the fire department, and we introduced a concept or philosophy called Rescue Task Force. And during that exercise, we recognized that with all the responding police departments, we were unable to speak to them. Very similar to what was experienced in New York during 9/11, that there's different entities that were responding, but everyone was on a different spectrum. So about 2 years ago, we purchased about 8 new portables that were Starcom compatible. So we purchased them and expended, I think it was like about $20,000 for those 8 portables, maybe a little bit more, because they could be used on our radio system, and then we could convert them or flash them up to Starcom radios. This last year, we purchased another 20 radios at an expense of about $92,000. So our total expense over 2 years was $111,000, or approximately there. But the offset to this is that we don't have telephone circuit costs with our current radio system, or the system that we used, because the way it was set up is we had 2 satellite receivers connected to a voter in this building by telephone circuits. And that was about $500 or $600 a month. And then we were paying maintenance on our transmitter and our other equipment. So when we looked at this from a cost-benefit analysis, we were either even or we were ahead by migrating to the Starcom radio system. Plus, we gained operational benefits in terms of interoperability. So, and it also helps the village later on down the road, because we're a part of CCOM, and because we are able to, currently we changed our CCOM. Terry and Algonquin now share a talk group. Instead of having to employ 1 dispatcher for each frequency that they had for each police department, now they only have 1 dispatcher for the 2 police departments. So that consolidation or partnership has saved you money, because personnel costs money. But the other part of it is that operational benefit in regards to the options we have related to, for example, we're going to have the half marathon tomorrow. We now can talk directly with the sheriff's office, who will be assisting us in the unincorporated areas where we didn't have that opportunity or ability before. So when we looked at this, we looked at it from both a cost perspective as it relates to maintenance and the ongoing telephone circuit costs that we had to pay, and we're continuing to accelerate, versus operational. And I believe that we made a very good decision, but it was 2 years out that we started this decision process, and anticipated that that was what was going to occur. Any questions in regards to that?
I don't have a question about that, but I have a question
Sure.
about the crossing guards. We were talking about maybe splitting the cost with the school on that. Are we still looking at that?
Yeah, it's included in the budget here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a revenue and there's an expense for the crossing guards. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, moving along to the Public Works Department. Public Works, so that makes up streets, forestry, fleet, facilities, engineering. You see here on the bottom left, it gives an overview of the chart as far as staffing goes. There's 3 salaried staff, there's 9 hourly staff. We have 4 seasonal workers that we're in the process of bringing on board here for this summer, and then obviously supplement that with contractors. So this fiscal year, this coming up fiscal year, we've had a reduction in approximately 12% for costs within the Public Works Department. That primarily, what that is made up of here is the reduction or elimination of contractual services related to plowing, and then we moved $180,000 of roadway maintenance out of the Public Works Fund into capital projects. That was discussed at the CIP. Here's a little bit of an overview of our contractual services. Obviously, too, we're very involved, Director Morimoto is, through the Municipal Partnering initiative here. These are a few projects that we have been working with and partnering with our fellow government agencies on. And Eric, if you could just give a brief commercial about our MPI program.
Sure. I think the board is well aware and should be very proud of the fact that Cary is one of the leaders in municipal partnering, particularly when it comes to expanding that initiative here in McHenry County. Cary's been involved in this process as far back as 2012. Originally, the concept came about with a group of Northern Cook and Lake County communities back in 2010. They started with a small handful of contracts that's built up to over 30 communities and 40 to 50 contracts now involved. In 2015, the Village of Cary took the initiative to introduce that concept to our neighboring agencies. And we managed to, through the help of the City of Woodstock, who had started a bi-monthly talk about pavement management specifically, we had suggested that we also expand that and talk about other parts. 2016, Cary led 2 different pilot projects with the McHenry County agencies. We did a joint and health benefit from, and also a crack filling contract with McHenry, Algonquin, and Woodstock. And those 2 contracts in 2016 led to the expansion to 11 different contracts in 2017, and now 16 contracts, which are in the works for 2018. And of those, as you see there on the slide there, of those 16 contracts, Cary is a part of 15 of them. So we continue to promote not only through, I think, leadership just by action, but we're also heavily involved in promoting the concept and educating the other communities. Myself, Assistant Director Walsh, and our management analyst, Courtney Sage, we spend a lot of time talking to other communities, showing them the process for the bid processing with joint contracts, and also just the benefits and logistics that we can share just by experience. So this continues to be a great process for us, and it does save us real dollars. You'll be seeing at the next village board meeting, we had a couple joint bids that Cary led for street sweeping and sidewalk replacement. The sidewalk replacement bid in particular, with that added quantity being localized here in McHenry County with, I believe, 4 other communities, we actually have a reduction in the unit costs that we received with this bid for 18 compared to 2017. So we're continuing that process and continuing to realize the benefits.
Great.
Great, thanks, Eric. So going forward here, Eric's going to give a little bit of an overview here about our cul-de-sac plowing, how we're recommending to proceed with it going forward, or we ultimately will be. We've had to make some tough decisions here through the budget. We're at that point where decisions are, as far as cuts go. This was one of the items here that's been cut here. It's going to impact how we plow cul-de-sacs. And Eric, if you could just walk them through how the cul-de-sac plowing will take place going forward.
Certainly. I think kind of in the philosophy that Jake had mentioned earlier, the village continually tries to look at trying to improve our cost efficiencies while minimizing, if not maintaining, the level of services. In the case of snow plowing over the last couple of years, we've attempted to actually increase the level of service. And in doing that, what we implemented over the years was the use of contractors to plow our commuter parking lots, village hall parking lots, and then in the bigger snow events to assist in the cleanup and hauling around the cul-de-sacs. That has in turn allowed the village staff that are in the mainline plow trucks to reduce their cycle times on the roadways. the main roads that the majority of the motorists are traveling on are cleared as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Well, that's been a great benefit. Obviously, the contractual cost for that at about budgeting roughly $60,000 per year.
That's just annual review of the budget. So what we're proposing is, in order to save that $60,000, is to not necessarily return to the way we did cul-de-sacs in the past, which would be to basically have our mainline drivers do their main routes, and then through every cul-de-sac, of which there's 97 in the village, they would have to spend significant time clearing the main route into the cul-de-sacs for each of the driveways, and also clearing the snow in the center of the cul-de-sac, and being careful not to pile it to cause obstructions in driveway approaches or sidewalk approaches. So what we're looking at doing with the removal, or potential removal of this service, is to change the way that we actually plow those cul-de-sacs. Traditionally, the drivers would be plowing the same direction as traffic, which then pushes the snow, as you know, outward toward the curb line. And that's where a lot of the challenges the time is taken in the snow removal process. Because in doing that, they have to make sure and clear those approaches and stack the snow very carefully. A lot of back and forth movements and a lot of double, triple handling that snow. So in not having the contractor there to do the cleanup for us as we're in the process of addressing these bigger events, what we would have our route drivers do is reverse plow the cul-de-sacs. So they would actually plow in the opposite direction, just in the bulb of the cul-de-sacs. And you see a typical cul-de-sac here. What they would do is they would come in and go the opposite direction and keeping the blade the same direction they always do, but push the snow to the center and maybe making multiple passes in that circle. So what that does is that clears access to the driveways. It also doesn't stack the snow, at least in the interim while we're in the main event, into the driveways. And it still makes the driveways accessible. Cars can still back out of those driveways, just like with the same amount of clearance that a homeowner on a regular straight section of roadway would encounter. And then once the snow event is tapered off, then we would go back and clean out that snow that's in the center of the roadway. Another benefit to this process and kind of working a little bit differently than we did in the past is that in hitting the outside first and leaving the snow in the center, we also don't cause drainage issues with ice buildups and ice dams. So that if we have another stacked event or if we have continuing major snow events, we're not causing any drainage issues by letting that snow sit there in the center for a while. Any questions?
Thanks, Eric. So going forward here, as we look at the general fund, the center column here is the present and where we're at. So we had a significant deficit that we're facing, made major cuts to the general fund budget. We're at balanced. So we should be proud of that, of being balanced. Going forward, though, we've got a deficit for the following fiscal year, 1920, that we're going to have to work on. This year, though, just to summarize the cuts that were made, we talked about here the contractual plowing, the assistant position that remains vacant, our allocation of the road improvements and maintenance to the capital projects fund, elimination of the grant program, our prosecuting line item has been reduced. There are also numerous significant line item cuts here across the board to all departments. That helped us cover the gap here so that we have a balanced budget to present to the village board. Going forward then for 1920, we have that deficit, as I had mentioned, and a lot of those drivers here, some items that we've talked about already, that police pension fund contribution that increases year over year, and the cost to doing business here and providing service to our residents, that continues to require the staff contractual obligations here that we have to provide those services. And when we have our flat revenues here, that's not helping the cause at all.
Jake, are you saying that in 2019, 2020, that our deficit's going to be 729,000?
That's what we had projected here. And Mike, if you can come up and just give a little overview of that. I believe that was from the 3-year financial forecast that we delivered to the village board in last fall, I believe, correct?
It is. Basically, it's a very simple calculation. at our labor and benefit costs, what those increases are going to be on an annual basis. I mean, generally, we realize contractually those salaries are going to go up anywhere from 2.5% to 3% a year. On the benefit side, health, dental, insurance, IMR pension costs, those will go up anywhere from 3 to 7% in the course of a year. We just take the current costs that we have, make some estimates, throw it into the formula, and look to get an understanding of what that deficit's going to be or surplus is going to be in the future. The reason we do that is to give us the opportunity to plan for it. I mean, when you're looking at a sum of money, here in the village of Cary, if you're looking at a sum of money that's $250,000, $300,000, there's not too many revenue sources that we can increase to make up $250,000, $300,000. So we need time to think about it, to talk about it, to put an action plan into place to allow us to make sure those revenues are going to be there. Process gets a little more complicated too when you look at it from the standpoint of we've survived the last few years based on the fact of we are drawing down reserves that have been built up over a period of time. Once those reserves are drawn down, you no longer have those multiple buckets that you can stick your hand into on an annual basis to continue to fund operations. There are not a lot of choices here in terms of, we've talked many times about new revenues. Property taxes, we've kind of kicked that issue back and forth. And we've been very conservative here in terms of any increases related to the village's taxes. So going forward, we will continue to look at what our ongoing costs are, try and be as frugal as possible, and try and move as many costs as we can to other funds or other funding sources.
So even with our balanced budget for this year, and even after the $500,000, of cuts, even with all of that in 2019, 2020, it's still a projected deficit of 729.
Let's talk about that a little bit. The only reason the budget is balanced is because, for the most part, simplest piece is we moved $180,000, $200,000 out of public works into the capital projects fund. All we did is took a cost that's going to be occurring on an annual basis and moved it there. Again, with those other costs that were cut out of there, the vacant village administrative position, we didn't fill it, basically cut it out of there. Going forward, the same decision will have to be made. If we're going to put it back in there, it's going to increase that cost. The costs that we moved to the capital projects fund, what do we do next year? Are we going to move another $200,000 of cost to the capital projects fund? If we continue down that path, the small balance that remains, I think currently at the end of this year, we're expecting a balance of $500,000 in the capital projects fund. We keep moving $200,000 of projects in there, you can imagine how long that's going to last. Probably the biggest concern that I have as a finance director is our vehicle replacement fund. Every single piece of equipment that this village has purchased here, at least in the time that I've been here, which is 4 years, came from the funds that were generated by Meyer Material. We know those funds are no longer coming in. The balance that's sitting in that fund, I believe, is $1.3 million. At annual costs on a very conservative level of $400,000 a year, that's 3 years at best of money that's sitting in that vehicle fund. That's pretty staggering because some of those trucks that Eric's running to plow snow on an annual basis, $200,000 a piece, easy. We don't just take a truck of $200,000, place it in the general fund budget and say, we're going to be able to afford to do this. And yet, if you look at it from a standpoint of, well, there something out of the budget, we've gotten to the point that there aren't a lot of things in the general fund budget that can generate $200,000. Most of those in the past have come from personnel because those tend to be your higher costs that are out there. But as Jake talked about earlier, we've already reduced the full-time employee count by 34%. So there's only so many bodies left there. So to answer your question, kind of took a little long. That $700,000 is very realistic unless two things happen. You either increase revenues or figure out other ways to cut costs. Unfortunately for us, the state's doing it for us because they continue to take at least 10% of our money. And at times they've talked to taking up in almost half of our income tax money. We're just assuming it's going to be 10% based on what they're talking about, but we never know until we see that budget passed.
And then prior to Meyer Material funding the police vehicles, what was our funding? How did you guys pay for that?
Well,
I think it was probably a transfer, I imagine, from the general fund to vehicle and equipment fund.
I think they were purchased directly out of the general fund.
Yeah, it was either way. The general fund, I believe, was supporting it. There was some excess surpluses that they were able to cover costs for vehicles that way.
And the costs, I mean, and Chief could speak to that. I mean, the costs we're paying for our vehicles in the police department and public works for the most part are well below costs what you'd pay on average for similar vehicles. They're probably, the performance of them is probably souped up a little bit, at least on the police side it is.
Michael?
Yes.
You almost answered the question I had, and I'll be a little bit more direct, but in this deficit of $729,000 that's projected, does that still include all these items that were cut for this budget?
Yes, sir.
So if hypothetically we cut those sort of again, we would be at 229,000 deficit?
What do you mean if you were to cut them again?
Are these items in that deficit budget?
He's saying if they'd stay out of the general fund.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Well, like in the capital project one that we were just talking about, you may have moved those capital projects. Next year, I'm going to need another $200,000 to fill that void. So that
Right.
$700,000 is a pretty real number there.
Right, but I'm saying like for the assistant village administrator position, if that's still vacant, does that deficit come down, 729,000?
But you're asking, are you adding it back?
I think that there would be a potential savings for,
Yes,
for
right.
that. The 729 was what was presented to the village board this
Right.
fall. And if we decide to keep the assistant position out of the budget going forward, yeah, then you'd have a reduction of that 729 a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just trying to see if those were added,
I see
were
what
in
you're
that
saying.
original forecast. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
For each and every one of them, we probably have to go back and look to see where it was plugged in terms of that 3-year projection.
Either way, I mean, we have work to do.
Right.
So.
And again, the reason we talk about it is just to give us time to do something with it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We've gotten the habit here lately to look out multiple years. Our CIP, we're looking out 5 years for the comprehensive CIP so that you're able to make informed decisions now, and you have that vision for the future. And that's the same for our general fund. When we do that budget forecasting here in the fall or midway through
That 3-year forecast.
so that we can make informed decisions now with still having that vision on the horizon here. So good questions. Are there any other questions that anyone has on this? We're going to come back to the
All funds,
funds such as the vehicle and equipment, talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the water and sanitation fund here, that kind of concludes our discussion related to the general fund. we're moving over now into a separate bucket of dollars. The Water and Sanitation Fund is an enterprise fund here. It's not funded through the general fund. This is funded through the water and sewer rates that our commercial users and our residents pay. So projected for next fiscal year, revenues of $5.4 million with expenditures of $6.5 million. We have our phosphorus limit project, obviously, that makes up that difference. As I think the village board understands here, that's a multi-million-dollar project that is causing the difference between the revenues and expenditures. We've issued debt here through an IPA loan to cover the costs related to that. That project then is baked into the water and sanitation rates. So our water and sanitation fund is very healthy. It's not too high as far as revenues go, not too low. We completed that water and sewer rate study to make sure that we have healthy reserves in there to able to fund our projects going forward. And this gives an overview here of some of the projects that we have planned for next year. Eric, can you help walk us through some of these projects? So going forward, our water and sewer study that was completed provides those rate certainties for both us, the village board, our residents, that there is no uncertainty as far as where the rates are going to be for the next 4 or 5 years here that are able to fund some of these projects. One of the largest ones here, the phosphorus project that you'll see here. And Eric, if there's any others that you wanted to highlight on this slide for the village board.
Sure. And this slide just captures the projects as compared to the previous fiscal year that were larger difference in expenditures or new projects. All with the exception of the last one there were presented and are part of the 5-year rate study that was analyzed and approved previously. That last project at the bottom is a Cary Creek Sanitary Sewer Stabilization Project. That is a project that we encountered unexpectedly that we're going to be addressing this summer. There's a sewer line, main sewer trunk line that crosses the creek that just through the natural erosion of the creek has become a bit more exposed than we prefer. It's not a dangerous situation, but the stabilization here will ensure that it does not become one. The other main project, aside from the phosphorus project, is in that first line there, the well number 10 water treatment system replacement. So that was one of the major capital items of that 5-year rate study. The first year will be the design of that project, and then in I believe it's either fiscal year 20 or 21 is when the major replacement of the entire treatment system in the well would be done. And as Administrator Reich mentioned, the phosphorus project, while it's a budgeted number in there, that is reimbursed to us through the low interest EPA loan program. So while it is a large number expenditure, obviously that is returned back to the sanitation fund.
Very good.
Thanks, Eric.
So moving on to our capital projects fund, we discussed a lot of these at length here at our CIP meeting on February 20th with the village board and got some good feedback from the village board at that meeting and after. We've made a couple adjustments here. You can see, we'll get to the
Next slide will cover the projects that we have within the capital projects fund for next year, but we removed the First Street extension design. We think that we can get all the work done associated with that this fiscal year. And also there's 3 sidewalks here. We had the Main Street sidewalk extension, the High Road sidewalk extension, and then also the Route 14 sidewalk extension. We've deferred those. The High Road and Route 14, we think there might be an opportunity for construction in 2020. And then finally, the regional lift station, touched on that a little bit and the importance of that project going forward at our CIP meeting. Plan to do the design here next year, and then following in 2020, in that fiscal year is when we would plan to do the construction of that regional lift station. So those have been moved out based on feedback that we had at the CIP meeting. And these are the projects that we've got plugged in right now. This, again, it's a separate bucket. This isn't related to our general fund. This is a separate bucket of dollars. This is a capital projects fund here. The chief is going to give an overview. Here we had one item that was added or moved up, and this was the police department, the regional training facility here. So that we didn't spend a lot of time at the CIP meeting discussing, but there is some need here to plug it in this year. He's going to give an overview of that. Another item of note that I wanted to point out,
We've got some flooding mitigation dollars, about $150,000 that we've plugged into the budget. The design at $95,000, and it includes construction of $55,000. So we continue through Public Works' guidance and working with our engineer here, Christopher Burke. We've been able to prioritize the most important projects within that, from that flooding study, and at least start the design next year, in some cases do construction. But Chief, if you could give a little bit of an overview of that training facility, please.
Sure. The McHenry County Sheriff's Department approached a number of different municipalities in regards to a consolidated training facility. The concept, and this is still in the conceptual stage right now, but the concept would be to have a training facility built on a parcel of property that the county owns near Valley View in Woodstock, or just outside of Woodstock. The Sheriff's Department has indicated that they would make a substantial monetary donation to this project. The municipalities would also have to share some costs in regards to the construction and the upkeep of this facility, but the concept is that would have a firearms range and then classrooms up there so that training could be provided on an ongoing basis. It would be such that the buildings and the range, the facility would be used, are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to accommodate schedules. And when we start talking about infrastructure in regards to the village, what this does is it eliminates one of those elements that you would consider when you're building a building. So it's one of those issues where you're partnering with people that have similar requirements. There's a familiarity with training other police officers from other jurisdictions. And again, the sheriff has taken or indicated that he would dedicate a significant amount of money to do this, and it would be set up very similar to CCOM, in that if we elect to participate at its inception, that we would have ability to have some say in regards to the manner in which this facility is, number one, constructed, but number two, as it goes forward and is run.
How would they break down, how are they going to decide if everyone participates in the county? How do they decide? Is there a proration as to how people are going to be paying into this?
Again, it's, yes, and somewhere down the road, that will have to be determined. But right now, this is, when we met, the amount of $100,000 to $150,000 was what was, as a conceptual, buy-in to this facility, number one. We've looked at a couple of different, very, very, very preliminary equipment or range options, and one of them was in the area of like $1.5 million to build for a 6 position range. But again, I've run ranges, in my previous experience, there's a cost to build them associated with the facility. There's issues potentially in regards to contamination of the real building that you operate out of, although they're limited if you do this right, number one, but then there's ongoing costs as it relates to running a range as there's mining for the spent ammunition, HVAC, maintenance or costs and things of that nature, plus someone has to be there, or you have to have some training in regards to how do you operate this equipment. So I think this is a good option, and it goes along with the partnerships of the law enforcement communities, municipalities in McHenry County, that it's something that everyone needs, and it removes that element from those buildings if you were going to consider building one.
So there's still some details. Obviously, this is in the very early stages here that need to be fleshed out. We just want to make sure that we have a dollar amount if, this next fiscal year, if folks are ready to go, that we're right there with them and we've got something plugged into the budget.
And I applaud the Sheriff's Office for coming forward with this and having, a concept in regards to this issue.
Jake, in other words, just for those in the audience, that would be a budgeted item that we wouldn't necessarily have to, it would still be voted on by the board before it's,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
That's what I wanted to make clear, there
Yep.
wasn't a.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's be clear about this. This is going to be a board that is established, and it'll be done through intergovernmental agreements and things like that. So yes, it will absolutely come before the board before there's any formal action taken.
A couple other items too, just to note in here, the downtown streetscape, we're still waiting to hear about the grant that we've applied for. Was hoping to hear about that in February, and we still haven't gotten word about that. So those dollars, again, good example here, Trustee Kosser, in comparison, that would come back to the village board for further discussion, if we receive the grant. In addition, mentioned the flooding mitigation, the Maplewood Access Road. We're not really sure exactly of where that development is going to go. If that developer decides to move on from the village of Cary, we'd want to look at that road holistically, not only from Cary-Algonquin Road, but all the way through, as we've discussed here, through the Metro parking lot, and have our engineers look at that. And then finally, on the bottom there, the changeable message board and speed trailer, talked about that a little bit at the CIP meeting. The chief right now is applying for a grant through ComEd, I believe.
It's a Powering and Safe Communities grant. It's through the Municipal Mayor's Caucus in Commonwealth Edison, and it's a grant up to $10,000 to be applied towards something that uses electricity to improve public safety.
So we'll see where we end up on that grant. This is for multiple speed trailers here, but that's also included in the capital projects fund. Again, separate bucket of dollars from the general fund. These would be the special projects that we'd be looking at completing next year. Be happy to take any questions that the board has about these, but we tried to filter it based on some of the feedback that we got at the CIP meeting on February 20th. So moving on here, and then just regrouping on this summary of all funds. We talked about this slide a little bit at the beginning with the general fund at column all the way to the left. See, that's our operating fund. That budget is balanced. MFT, the motor fuel tax dollars that we get, touched on that at the CIP meeting. That goes to pay for our roads. Our bond fund, here moving along from left to right, bond fund goes to pay off our debt that we have within the village of Cary. We touched on all those debt issuances that we have. Our capital project fund and vehicle and equipment fund, those are the two funds that we really need to do some work on. And this year, we're going to have to talk about some potential new revenue sources to plug into both of those funds. The TIF funds, here we have two TIFs, one over by where we commonly refer to it as the Selkie property, and then TIF 2 is in the downtown. Our Land Conservancy Fund, which is for the Meyer Lafarge property. Healthy fund balances within that. We have some various projects that are planned for the next fiscal year related to park improvements, trees, some other landscaping, signage out on that site that we'll regroup with the village board on once we acquire the property. The revolving loan fund, I think the board is well aware of that. We have those dollars that are assigned for the village of Cary to use however we choose. Our water and sanitation fund, we talked about some of the projects that are occurring in that this fiscal year. Again, we completed the water and sewer rate study last fall. There's that rate certainty both for the village of Cary, but then also for our residents going forward about what the rates are going to be to ensure that we can maintain our water and sewer infrastructure in a timely fashion. Our parking fund, as you know, we're completing the Metro project, our Metro Station project. It's going to start hopefully this fall. Here we're working on the IGA for that. The balances are going to be reduced here just due to the costs related to the building. That's planned. We're also within that fund going to be completing some pedestrian improvements on that far northwest pedestrian crossing here as far as a new ramp goes and a gate. Those are the majority of the costs related to the parking fund. And finally, the building fund, those dollars are set aside for future public safety and potentially building. So are there any questions about when we go through all the funds, separate bucket of dollars that we look at separately, but does anyone have any questions? The budget in a lot of make a lot of cuts. We're doing the same thing that we did last year, but this year it's costing us a little bit more. So we've had to make some cuts as far as our services go here. We've got some really good projects coming up though next year as far as the Metro building, continuing to work on our police public safety building here too, the improvements that are going on within our wastewater treatment plant. So there's a lot to be proud of here. We should be happy. We have a balanced budget and good projects going forward. So with that, we had a couple items that we wanted to, while we had everyone here, we can get through pretty quickly, wanted to touch on, and Eric is going to give an overview here of the cemetery fence. We had an accident, if you'd see on the upper right-hand slide there, a car had hit the fence and damaged the fence, and just want to talk to the board about the fence here.
Thank you. These two items are things where the circumstances have changed just slightly since the original budget was prepared. What I have before you are some options with regards to that cemetery fence, one of which I believe we can accommodate within the budget for next fiscal year and not change our overall position. So as you know, there's an existing wrought iron fence that is on two sides, the First Street facing side of the cemetery and the Pearl Street side on the north. That wrought iron fence is significantly aged, even without the accident that occurred on First Street, taking out that couple sections of fence. The rest of the fence, those are just some select photos, shows a lot of deterioration in the iron. Some of the little spikes at the top of the fence unit themselves are bent or missing. The fence is leaning and warped in multiple areas. And rust is also beginning to encompass a good portion of the material itself. Being a wrought iron fence is not a fence that's easily repaired with traditional welding techniques. It does require some other specialized work to make that possible. And then just the fact that the overall condition of it is so far gone that it is going to require probably three options here. First would be to replace the entire unit. We had a quote done about 6 or 7 years ago. Pricing has changed slightly, so my numbers reflect at least an estimate of that. Just the short time I had to prepare this, of about $20,000 plus or minus. That may actually involve our staff doing the installation as well. Option B would be to remove the entire fence and then, at least on the First Street side, just replace a few panels on each side of that decorative arch that would exist and remain. That little rendering there is a very basic kind of look, view of how it would look with a few panels on each side, just to maintain some balance. We also have some headstones that are particularly close to the sidewalk that right now in the existing condition are directly right behind the fence. And then in addition to that, in that area, because of those headstones being so close to the sidewalk, we'd also propose some very low shrubbery and vegetation just to, again, balance that separation and try to maintain the pedestrians on the sidewalk as opposed to too close to those stones. Pearl Street, we would remove the fence and not recommend any replacement. Right now, there's currently gaps spaced throughout that side of the roadway with the fencing. And there's also a series of about 6 to 8 trees, mature trees. So there already is a defined boundary on that side. And also there's no sidewalk on that side of Pearl Street. Then option C would be just remove the fencing and not replace anything at all. We feel just from just not only the aesthetic side, but just from the practical separation because of the sidewalk on First Street, we would suggest option B, but we're open to the board's feedback.
The vehicle that hit this, was it kind of like a hit and run, or did they stop? Is there any insurance that goes along with?
I haven't been able to review the crash report yet, but obviously if there's an insurance claim made and there's a entity that we're able to recoup that from, it would obviously go back and could contribute towards the cost. But obviously, even if that's the case, that would only probably manage to cover the cost for just the section damaged. The rest of the fence, as you can see, is almost as bad as the part that was hit by the car.
We'd seek subrogation through IRMA they would handle all that for us, but it would just be a small portion of the fence that we'd be able to get dollars for.
The previous analysis of the aluminum fencing, so we would also propose to replace it with a material that's more accessible, easily replaced, and cost-effective. So this would be a black aluminum fencing with some similar elements with the same kind of ornate spikes in the design. It does, however, have a top rail so that from a safety standpoint, the current fence is about 3 feet high with the metal spikes coming above it. One could argue it's probably not the best option to have when you have pedestrians right next to it. This would be a similar look with a little bit of a safety benefit as well.
Any feedback?
Personally, I'd be for option B, or which is out of character with me, maybe option A. My primary concern is pedestrian cut-through traffic in the cemetery, so if there's no fence, I'm worried about damage to the headstones and such. So that's sort of where I sit, and I'm not really sure where A or B right now. It's, of course, we don't have tons of money to spend, but I don't want to see anything happen to the grave sites there. So
Another option is kind of between A and B would be maybe to replace the fence just on the First Street side and not on the Pearl Street side as well, which would not completely eliminate, but would maybe reduce that concern as well. But obviously that would take a little bit more of a look on our end to accommodate something larger than $5,000.
I'd go with, excuse me, B or C. I think it's pretty accessible already, and I don't think we've had a lot of issues with gravestones being disturbed or anything, have we?
We've had a few. We have one family that monitors this all the time, and there is some headstone tipping going on there on occasion. But to your point, it's many open spots along Pearl Street.
Right. Well, even if we put that on, they'd still have access if someone wanted to go in there. I don't mean it, I'm just trying to be realistic. If somebody wants to go in there and tip a headstone, it's not a locked situation. No matter what, they could get in there and do that. That's a separate issue, type of thing, so.
I said B or C.
I would prefer option C.
I'd go with C.
I tend to lead more towards B, leaving the first street with the arch and just replace the panels. Is there any way that you could repurpose some of the fencing from the Pearl side to fix what you have here? Is that something that's a possibility?
It might be possible, but like I mentioned, the distressed nature of the fence is kind of throughout the entire
It's pretty fragile
portion
to
of it.
begin with anyway.
And being that wrought iron, the reassembly of it is unfortunately not as simple as it would be with the aluminum fence.
Well, I'm seeing that maybe people are leaning more towards B. Can you get some hard costs on these? Just, can you bid it out and then give some real figures on that?
Well, I don't know if we're gonna bid this project, but we can talk to some vendors to get specific numbers.
Would this, is there any money in the cemetery fund for this?
The cemetery fund was closed out several years ago.
I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was
This is all
nothing in there.
This is all gonna come out of the general fund.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
And then the next
We got
item,
Oh,
just a quick update, something new that has come up, there's a grant opportunity that we've been made aware of that would provide a rebate through ComEd for retrofitting of streetlights to LED. This is something we had budgeted, proposed $5,000 in the commuter parking fund already to do about half the lights in that area, having a phased approach. First come, first serve program, and it gives you a is that you implement. So if we're able to implement before May 31st, we'd be able to get a rebate of about 42 lights, not just half, for roughly the cost I had budgeted for doing a phased approach. So if the board is okay with the approach and would like to move forward, I would need to start the process now and then obviously try and get these things procured and installed probably within the next month, obviously, and then try and take advantage of that grant opportunity. but I want the board to be aware that this is out there. It's not required that we move forward on it, but like I mentioned, it's part of our budgeted program already, but this will allow us to get the whole thing done at once for roughly the same price.
But it's slightly more than what we had budgeted, correct?
Yes, 5,400 roughly versus 5,000 that I had budgeted.
Yeah, so it's a little bit over, but with the grant opportunity here, it's something that we think we should take advantage of.
I say run, get it in. That's just all of it, and it's $376 more than to me.
And we will also recoup some of that cost compared to the high-pressure sodium units that are out there now.
Right.
There's about a 27% decrease in energy use per year, so there's a long-term savings as well.
I say do the whole thing too. Go ahead.
Anybody else?
I'm in favor of it.
Kim?
Sure.
Okay. We had some marching orders there. Nothing else? Okay.
Thank you for always finding these grants, though. You do a great job with that.
Yeah, staff does a great job.
All of you guys.
Yeah, it's across the board. I mean, all department heads have a
Yep.
grant that they're working on right now, so it's a job well done.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thanks for your time.